our economy is shrinking more than any other economy in the G7. He wants to tax our small business job creators. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the definition of insanity?
Today, when they are choosing to vote with the wealthiest Canadians and against young Canadians who need more housing, young Canadians who need a better break, seniors who need dental care, they're all trying to spin it in 9 different ways. The reality is they have an opportunity to vote with middle-class Canadians, and they're choosing to vote against them.
Welcome back to Question Period. After almost 2 months of not taking a position on the Liberals' proposed capital gains tax inclusion rate increase, the Conservatives officially voted against the move this week when the government introduced a motion to move the increase forward. The Liberals insist the tax hike is about fairness, as you heard, and funding important investments, while the Tories claim it will kill jobs, among other things. The change will see the capital gains inclusion rate increase from 50% to about 67% for individuals earning more than $250,000 in capital gains in a given year, and on all capital gains realized by corporations and trusts. The change is expected to generate $19.4 billion of revenue for the federal government over 5 years. Let's unpack the politics of it with our Sunday strategy session. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Next to her, Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid was a former Director of Communications to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Hi. Good to see you. Corey, I'll start with you since we are graced with your presence in studio this week. We had sort of speculated that the opposite would happen with the Conservatives, that because it was so clearly designed to be a wedge between the Conservatives and the Liberals, that just like with the anti-scab legislation, they wouldn't take the bait. Why do you think they decided to do differently? And was it the right decision?
Well, I think because a lot of Conservatives were uncomfortable with them supporting a tax hike, which is pretty off-brand for Conservatives to do. Conservatives like to pride themselves on being anti-tax. I think that's generally true. I think that there's also, something in the research that would indicate that it's a smart thing to do. The capital gains tax measure on the face of it is reasonably popular, well over half people, if you minus the government out of the equation. But I think we're in the space right now where anything that comes out of the mouth of Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland is viewed with great suspicion by a lot of the electorate, and more than 100% of people who might ever consider voting for the Conservative Party. So I think they felt like the risk of having it framed poorly for them was reasonably low, given that.
Do you think that's the case, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think strategically what Pierre Poilievre did today, after sitting on his hands, for 8 weeks and not making a decision, he made the decision, he came out swinging, and he's trying to frame the conversation. He's trying to, steer the storyline, if you will. And his language has been really strong, right? You're going to put a tax on home builders. You're going to stop the small job business creators. And he might be successful in winning the communication war. If you look at his success on the carbon tax, he may be successful again. And what's so confounding to me, really, is that the Liberals set this perfect trap for him, but then failed to kind of address some of the criticisms that have been coming against the capital gains tax, like concerns that people, frankly, who won't even be impacted about it, but think they're going to be impacted about it. So it's kind of like, honestly, it's like Wile E. Coyote, who sets this trap for his enemy, and then all of a sudden gets whacked by the anvil, and there it is, the Liberals once again, not doing the preparation, not actually thinking through or gaming out the whole scenario and having the answers to some of these questions to push back now against Pierre Poilievre's very strong communications game, when this is the right policy. I truly believe that this makes our tax system more neutral and better and more fair. But I don't know if the Liberals can dig out of this strong communication games that the Conservatives have.
The message that they have used to counter the narrative from the Conservatives that this is an additional tax, essentially that like they characterize the carbon tax, will make life more affordable, Scott, is that it is about tax fairness, one, and two, funding the investments that Canadians very much value and that only the Liberals are in a position to deliver on. That's the message that they are trying to send to Canadians. Do you think that is resonating?
Hard to tell. I mean, there's a fundamental factor here, too, which is who's hearing any of this? For the Conservatives, I think you can conclude that they don't think the Liberals framed this in a way that they had to fear. So they don't think this issue has set in with Canadians, that it's a matter of tax fairness or that this measure actually is going to fund programs that people value. So I think that's partly the explanation with the Conservatives. But I guess partly I question whether anyone is hearing this. And we've heard, Corey talks about the messengers, and I think that's fair. But, is anyone really listening? Does anyone really heard this? I think that's an important question, because if you're the Liberals, your relatively cerebral appeal, which is this is how this works and who it will affect on balance more them than you. And by the way, it will then provide a source of funds for things that's a long and cerebral appeal. And when they've moved off of the cerebral appeal, as we saw earlier this week from Minister Freeland, they go into this hyper emotional, over the top. If you don't do this, there'll be rivers of flame which will engulf the rich, and the rest of them will rise and take back Canada. And it's so over the top that doesn't register either, or it registers with ridicule. So, I mean, a big question for me is, unless they're going to advertise on this, how are they going to get the message out?
All right, I got to switch gears, just do a quick round on the kind of other big story of the week, which is foreign agents and Elizabeth May saying nothing to worry about after reading the fully unredacted report. Jagmeet Singh saying the polar opposite after he read it. Pierre Poilievre, Corey, refusing to even read it at this point. Is that a mistake?
I think it's a mistake. I think it's off his brand. He's got a strong alpha leadership sort of persona that he's pursued, I think, very effectively, and I think it's been working very well for him. But this see no evil, hear no evil, avert your eyes from the issue approach, I think it's out of character for him. I think it's off brand. I think people don't understand if there's a list of people who are compromised, some of them in your party, and you're the leader of that party. Why wouldn't you want to know who they are? And why wouldn't you want to remove them? It brings his position too close to Trudeau's position. And I think Trudeau's position has been indefensible throughout this entire process. I think you sometimes have to lift up the rock and see, all the ugliness of, creatures scurrying around underneath, and expose it to sunlight to clean that up. And, we've seen other parties do it. We had to do it provincially in Ontario, where, there's a very Han Dong-esque character who had to get removed from caucus provincially. You never get blamed if you do the right thing and clean these things up. But boy, are people ever suspicious of you if you don't want to even take a look.
You don't get the big job if you're not willing to do the tough work. And him not actually getting the security clearance, reading the document, and doing that heavy work means that he's frankly disqualified from being prime minister. Because when you're prime minister, guess what? You need to protect the security of the country. You need to make sure that we don't have treason happening in our parliament. And he has basically said so far, I'm not willing to do that. Guess what? You don't get the job then. Like, you don't get the job if you're not willing to do the work.
Ironically, the current prime minister also appears unwilling to do that.
Yeah.
He read the document, Scott, and there's nothing that's happened since, basically.
We have an unacceptable situation, flat out. Like, it's just literally unacceptable. Right now, you've got a game of treason Tower of Babel. The committee comes out and says that there are people in Parliament who conspired with foreign governments against the national interest. Elizabeth May says that's not the case. She read the report. Nope. Jagmeet Singh says, yep, there are traitors. By the way, none in my party. Increasingly, it seems to me, we need to hear from the Prime Minister and we need to hear from Pierre Poilievre. They need to stand up and say, I've read the report. I've determined that no one in my caucus is guilty of something that causes me concern, and so they're going to stay. And I'm going to say that the allegations and the evidence are uncompelling. Or they need to say, I've read the report, here's what the situation is, and I'm moving on it and acting on it and taking somebody out of caucus. I think that's the only way we can get any kind of resolution. And for Pierre Poilievre to just try to pass on this and pretend that he can evade the responsibilities of leadership at the same time that he asks that the Prime Minister be accountable for them, it's a head shake. And I think it looks increasingly like a political dodge. It is off-brand for him, as Corey says, and I think it's going to become an increasingly political problem for him.
Our Sunday strategy session. Thanks, guys. Scott Reed, Corey Tenike, and Kathleen Monk.